Hello everyone, my name is Daniela Romero. I'm a student at Royal Roads University in the program of Disaster and Emergency Management, and today I'm going to be talking to you about disaster victim identification, or DVI, and cultural sensitivity. So for today's presentation, we're going to be talking about what is disaster victim identification, what are the standards for disaster victim identification, and what is the exact process. As well, we're going to be talking about cultural sensitivity. What are the challenges within DVI in terms of cultural sensitivity? What new developments are within the DVI process, as well as key points to keep in mind, and we'll finalize with a conclusion. Okay, so what is DVI? Disaster Victim Identification, or DVI, is the organized process of victim and body recognition after a mass fatality disaster event. It may be necessary after a natural disaster like a hurricane, snowstorm, or an earthquake, or it can also follow a terrorist event, a post-war scenario, or any other case like these. The number of victims necessary for the process to be initiated depends on a case-by-case scenario, as well as the jurisdiction in charge of the process. For example, victim recognition may be necessary after a road accident of 4 and 5 victims, but it will also be necessary for a mass natural disaster like an earthquake. Disaster victim recognition does not matter the circumstances, requires high levels of forensic and other kinds of expertise that will allow for a thorough and effective process. Among these professionals and expertise are included local law enforcement agencies, specialized teams, such as photographers, laboratory experts, and others. Also, forensic medical examiners, forensic anthropologists, forensic odontologists, civil protection units for assistance of their main forensic teams, and also medical experts or nurses, psychologists, that will support the disaster victim identification teams, as the process can be very, very demanding and challenging both physically and mentally. Now let's talk about the disaster victim identification standards. The Interpol first set the standards and protocols over 20 years ago in 1984. These protocols and standards are updated every 5 years and are the one and unique set of standards for disaster victim identification. The Interpol provides guides and forms to follow protocols. It also provides help and guidance if required, and they can also deploy other global response teams to provide help to a certain affected area. For example, in the specific case of Canada, its DVI team is composed by forensic and police experts from many law enforcement agencies and other fields all over Canada. Canada's law enforcement agency in charge of DVI is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP, who in the case of disaster victim identification will work together with the federal, provincial, and municipal governments. Each province is responsible of the respective DVI process, and when resources are not sufficient, then a national response will take place. As well, if necessary and if summoned by the Interpol, Canada will support any disaster victim identification process globally. Now let's dive into the process. The disaster victim identification core process follows 4 steps, as mentioned before, set by the Interpol. The first step, a disaster assessment or scene examination. At this step, the magnitude of the event is analyzed in order to start the victim identification. The second step is the post-mortem data collection. At this step, bodies are examined by experts looking at any traces that might help the identification, so they're looking at fingerprints, teeth, and collecting any DNA possible in order to find the correct identity. The third step, the ante-mortem data collection, is necessary to collect data like medical and detailed records DNA, and any other information before the victim's passing that will help out match a body with the correct identity. And finally, the fourth step called reconciliation. Reconciliation step consists of using the data post-mortem and ante-mortem data that will be cross-referenced to identified victims. Okay, now let's talk about cultural sensitivity. From that 2008, quote, to achieve cultural sensitivity, one must have knowledge of cultural differences and values. So cultural sensitivity means that we're aware that not all people are the same and that my culture is not better than any other culture. Many cultures manage and process death differently than the Western world does, and this is why it is crucial for disaster victim identification teams to be culturally sensitive. Now, disaster victim identification challenges with culture in relation to culture. When multiple cultures have to work together or just work in general, it is very important that the cultural differences are well addressed by the different disaster victim identification teams, as these differences may present certain cultural sensitivity challenges. For example, if and when foreign experts are present, a sense of lack of power and knowledge might be present coming from local authorities. However, this could not be further from the truth, as local authorities and experts are crucial for a harmonized and well-developed process. And why is this? Because they are the most aware about local culture and can be key sources of knowledge that will help foreign teams familiarize themselves with local customs in order to not disrespect any local communities. Teams must work together to ensure cultural sensitivities and that cultural sensitivities are addressed, whether it's a religious matter, a legal matter, or in general any cultural attitude or practice, to determine appropriate actions and processes. Now let's talk about the development of disaster and victim identification. Although disaster and emergency management standards have been available for the past 20 years, only as of 1993, DNA testing became a tool used to identify disaster victims, as previously dental records and medical records were the only means to match a body with an identity. Also, fingerprints were used, but often enough fingerprints were not available to be taken from a body. For example, if there was a fire, the remains could have been significantly damaged that the fingerprints were not available. These methods continue to be used and accompanied by DNA testing, which allows for a thorough process. When DNA typing started being used, it was the last resource used for victim recognition, as it was very slow and very costly. Today, on the other hand, DNA is one of the main methods of disaster victim recognition, as technology has significantly improved, as the use of it has allowed for development of more practical and accurate DNA systems. Now let's go back to some key points that are important to remember. It is ideal when local authorities are working with foreign experts in order to have a more thorough and understanding DVI process. DNA technology and victim recognition technology will only continue to grow and improve to allow better and more accurate results, even for very damaged remains. As well, it is crucial that multicultural, multidisciplinary, and multi-methodological teams and processes are used for disaster victim identification. Now, to finalize the presentation, I would like to say that disaster victim identification is a process that it is required after most natural and human-caused disasters globally. The multicultural needs and challenges posed by such process need to be addressed. This is why, and this is the reason why local teams as well as foreign experts must work together to reduce cultural vulnerabilities. And that is all for today. So thank you very much for your time.